Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. North Legislative Chamber for the 43rd day of the 107th Legislature second session. Our chaplain for today is Senator Clements. Please rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. Please join me as we pray. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You are good. Your steadfast love endures forever, and your faithfulness to all generations. We thank you for your goodness. Every beast of the forest is yours, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. You own all we have, and we are just stewards of that which you have blessed us with. Today we look to you, Lord, for guidance and to be directed by your wisdom. Direct us as we make decisions on the state's budget and the people's money. May we not lay up for ourselves treasures on earth, but let us lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven. Today we ask you, Lord, to be with the people of Ukraine, to help them stop the invasion threatening to take away their freedom. These people have suffered at the hands of evil before and deserve to be left in peace. Give them courage and strength to protect their families and their way of life. We ask you, Lord, to guide our nation's leaders and grant them wisdom and understanding to uphold what is right. We thank you for your guidance today. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Senator Clement. Senator Ehrman, you're recognized for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Senator Ehrman. I call to order the 43rd day of the 107th Legislature second session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
I have a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
No corrections this morning, sir.
Thank you. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
None at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We'll now proceed to the first item on the morning's agenda.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 1011 was discussed yesterday. When we left the bill, pending were both the committee amendments from the Appropriations Committee as well as Senator Lathrop's FA 74.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Stinner, would you like to take 1 minute to refresh us on 1011?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, this is a special day today. It's Clark Coulterman's birthday. Clark Coulterman's twins with Senator Coulterman. So Senator Coulterman's happy birthday. LB 1011 is a bill that was brought to the legislature on behalf by the speaker on behalf of the governor. And as I said yesterday, there's only really one big change in that the appropriations did, and that was to add provider rates and offset it with excess funding within the behavioral health and a couple other of the accompanying. And there is a listing of what we offset it with as it relates to that. We did really kind of focused on the fact that we wanted to bring as much dollars to the floor as we possibly could in the general funds. We knew there was some interest in revenue bills, and so $453 million, which I don't know if that's a record, but it's got to be pretty close to a record for dollars to the floor. The Amendment 199 is actually the bill, if you want to follow along with that. And obviously, there's detail in the mid-biennium budget. With that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. Senator Brandt would like to recognize Dr. Jason Bespolets of Geneva, who is serving as our family physician of the day. Dr. Bespolets is seated under the north balcony. Please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign the following legislative resolutions: LR 321, 322, 323, 324, 325, and 326. Turning to debate on FA 74. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized.
Is this for purposes of an update, or am I just recognized on the bill?
Recognizing you on the bill.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, and good morning, colleagues. I know some of you might have left a little early yesterday. So I'm going to give just sort of an overview of what we talked about in the hour between 7 and 8 o'clock. Very, very broad picture. So the amendments that I filed is to provide an opportunity for us to have a discussion about what I think is a crisis in the state, and that is the overpopulation or the overcrowding at the Department of Corrections. And we began the process by handing out a chart yesterday that shows the rate of growth of our incarcerated population. And in addition to our current rate of our historical rate of growth, we also have a projection from an outfit called JFA. JFA's been doing population projections for the state. I think they've done 4 or 5 of them for the state. In addition to Nebraska, they do this in other places. They're experts at it. They projected our population, and you can see that on the chart that I provided. It is represented by the dashed line. There is, on that same chart that we handed out last night, a blue line that represents design capacity of the entire Department of Corrections. All the facilities, you add them up in that blue line, and you see that it's flat for many, many years. Those would be the Heinemann years, during which there was no expansion of any capacity at the Department of Corrections. The red line represents operational capacity, a different number. That's 125% of design capacity. That is statutory. That's right in the statute. It defines operational capacity. And you'll see that those lines start to move upward. And those upward movements represent additional capacity that we've added, and I'll say since Governor Ricketts came to office, this legislature and the governor have made the decision to expand our capacity. You will see those grow, and I'm able to tell you what each one of those lines represent. But the last significant increase in those red and blue lines represents the net pickup if we were to close the penitentiary as the governor has proposed and build 1,500 beds at some yet to be determined location. So the penitentiary, if we close the penitentiary and add 1,500 beds, we are effectively improving our capacity by 700 beds. 700 beds, that's the net effect. And so that last surge in those red and blue lines, colleagues, is the net effect of building additional capacity and closing the Department of the penitentiary. You will see it's plainly obvious from this that we have an overcrowding problem that we can't build our way out of. Nor can we, I appreciate we're doing the donuts. I appreciate that we're doing the donuts. I hope you have a chance to listen to what I'm saying, because this is really important. We are at a crisis place. We are at a crisis place. The overcrowding is a crisis. The staffing is a crisis. Our ability to manage the people that we are charged with incarcerating is at a crisis. And we're here to talk about it today. And we can't build our way out of this, colleagues. If we spent $270 million to add 700 beds to our capacity, we would need to double that just to meet the basic operational capacity by 2030. This conversation is happening during the budget debate because this is a budget issue. Whether you are concerned with the dignity of the people we incarcerate, or you look at this fiscally, we have a problem with both. Today, we're going to spend a little bit of time sharing with the members the information that we have gathered during the CJI process, during 12 years on the Judiciary Committee, and the concerns of the Appropriation Committee, with the idea that we are going to begin this process of trying to build our way out of the problem.
That's time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator DeBoer, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, my first hearing after I was elected was about the pending, at that time, overcrowding emergency in our prisons. Director Frakes graciously came in and talked to us. At that hearing, I asked him, in all my first year, first week naivete, can we build our way out of this problem? His answer that day was no. We can't build our way out of this problem. Last night I talked about how those of us on the Judiciary Committee feel like sometimes we're crying out in the wilderness and no one is listening. It's a very familiar thing right at this moment. Some folks say, what's the connection between this overcrowding emergency, which we have now declared and been in for several years, and the prison? They say this is a different issue. But here's why it's the same issue for me. We need a plan. I asked that day, what's the plan? What's the plan for getting us out of this overcrowding situation that we have in our prisons that's the worst in the country? We were second worst, now we're the worst. What's the plan? There wasn't a plan. There still isn't a plan. This new prison can't be the entirety of our plan. It can't even be the main pillar of our plan. Look at the graph. This can't be the plan. The plan has to be multifaceted. There has to be something to, as I said last night, because I found it was sort of clever once I said it, we need to flatten the curve. We've got to find a way to change the slope of that curve, because we cannot build our way out of the prison overcrowding emergency that we're in. Why should we care? I may have mentioned last night that this is an issue for our communities, because the vast majority of people who go into these prisons come out. At the end of their term, they come out and they are next door to you. They're in the grocery store with you. And if you imagine that putting someone into a situation where for a couple of years, they're in a space that's 3 times as crowded as it's supposed to be, with a bunch of other people, and they're not getting their programming, and they're what we call jamming out. Jamming out means that they get to the end of their sentence and they haven't had all of the things that they need to have in order to be eligible for parole. If they jam out and they come out and they're shopping at the grocery store next to you, and they've been stuck in this prison with 3 times as many people as they're supposed to, do you suspect that they're feeling more kindly towards society? Do you suspect that they feel more like they should respect the authority of society than they did when they went in?
1 minute.
This is a public safety concern. I haven't even begun to talk about the people who work in the prison, who are our neighbors as well, who do a hard job and who do it. It's astounding when you listen to them. They do it because they feel called to it. This is a calling for them. And it's a hard job that a lot of us wouldn't want to do, although Senator Blood has done it. So I think hopefully she'll speak to us about that. We need a full plan. We need to flatten this curve, change the slope of our average daily incarceration level. This is a problem that we have to solve. We keep kicking it down the road. Somebody's got to do something.
Time,
we are
Senator.
the ones tasked. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Stinner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, I'd like to get back on the budget and kind of give you a glimpse of the two major items that adjusted the budget, and that is certainly provider rates, but agency salaries were renegotiated during the when we were off as it relates to before session. In any event, right after we had met in the special session, we've got out of special session. Appropriations had some MLRs, which I came back for, and I was got a call from the governor, and he said, "Please come to my office. We need to have a meeting." And the meeting entailed with the budget director, Lee Will, the head of DAS, and the governor. And we sat down, and he said, "We got a major league problem in our state. We can't fill critical positions. We got tons and tons of vacancies." If you think about what was the problem, is that we need to raise salaries, we need to renegotiate salaries, because we can't attract and retain people to these critical jobs. And I think everybody remembers corrections and the vacancies associated with corrections. And you also need to understand, we also operate the Vets Hospital in Kearney, which was never full because they couldn't staff it. And they were losing staff and having to turn away people who needed help as far as veterans are concerned. And we have a Vets Hospital in Scottsbluff, or not a Vets Hospital, excuse me, a nursing home in Scottsbluff. We have a DD facility, a 24/7 facility. These are 24/7 facilities. And so he talked about the fact we need to renegotiate that, and we've got some critical positions open. We have people that are critical to the state leaving the state because we're not paying them enough. And of course, the budget director and I talked about the fact we can probably arrange, there's enough vacancy savings in the budget we can get to the end of this fiscal year. But I also was asked to call Senator McDonald to help negotiate with the Fraternal Order of the Police. And so he actually helped with that negotiation. If you saw, it's about a 30% increase in wages, significant increase in wages. Also renegotiated the employee salaries, significant increase in wages. And I green lighted it. I said, absolutely. We've got to have staff. We've got to make sure that we can attract and retain the people we need to run our state. So kudos to the governor for that recognition. And certainly kudos to the budget director for moving the chairs around so that we didn't have a fiscal disaster right in front of us. But that also carries over logically to providers. And we've had several discussions with nursing homes, and if you remember, that's a critical issue with me. We actually had a bunch of nursing homes actually fail. We actually went through a change in methodology that Senator Williams negotiated. We gave them increases in reimbursement rates, rearranged a lot of different things to make sure those dollars went out to the nursing homes. And for a short period of time, the nursing homes quit failing. Now we have another crisis. And the crisis is obviously the census is down.
1 minute.
Nobody put their loved ones into the nursing homes. But they also have lost staff. And so therein lies a problem there as well. That's 24/7. So theoretically, they should get a bump of 30% as well. Well, in appropriations, we did 15 for nursing homes. We did 15 for DD. We did 15 for child welfare. We also did a 15% increase in behavioral health, halfway to the wall. We're going to use ARPA to bridge that in. And it saddens me that somebody suggested that it was too much, that we got to cut it back to 7.5 because we need to have more money for the floor. $453 million we brought to the floor, and we got to have more money for the floor. I'm sorry, that really does not work well with me. We have to take care of these providers. We have to have nursing homes. Certainly in rural Nebraska, we need to have
Time,
nursing.
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. Mr. Clerk, for announcements.
Mr. President, the exec board will hold an exec session under the South Balcony now. Exec board, South Balcony now. Additionally, Mr. President, some items, if I may. Conflict of interest statement from Senator Moorfeld will be on file with the clerk's office. Additionally, LR 335 from the Education Committee, that'll be laid over. And Senator Hokeman introduces LR 336, that'll also be laid over. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Returning to debate, Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I actually stand in support of Senator Lathrop's floor amendment, and I want to say that I have nothing but respect for Senator Stinner, and I agree 100% with what he just said in reference to our providers. So much of what we're talking about in this current budget is really about things that have festered for decades, the prisons and their staffing being one of them. And I was asked to speak, and I've kind of held back. To be really frank, I've had laryngitis all week, so I wanted to wait until I could actually be heard. I did work maximum security for 6 years, and I also worked for a crisis center for abused women and children, both domestic violence and sexual assault with a shelter. And I sat on and resided over the Bellevue Public Safety Foundation. So I really have a 360-degree view of everything we've been talking about. And so I want to offer some food for thought, and I really hope people are listening because I know that, as Senator Lathrop has pointed out over and over again, it just seems like people kind of know how they're voting when they come to the floor, and there doesn't really seem to be this sense of let's communicate, let's see if we can move things around and make it better. So what I know, based on my experience and based on my research, is that every year when you look at statistics when it comes to our state prison system, the majority of Nebraskans say that our prisons are meant to rehabilitate. But the weird dichotomy is that almost the exact same number, they also say that punishment is a priority. So before the tough on crime movement of the 70s, actually, we were moving towards rehabilitation. And I was always taught that prisons are about rehabilitate, incapacitate, retribution, and deterrence. So when you look at the system that we have now in Nebraska, and again, we're trying to fix something that has festered for years. I remember reading things from when Governor Heineman was here and Lathrop was carrying the flag to institute better rehabilitation, to try and fix the system so we would quit tunneling people to prisons that were nonviolent that could perhaps be rehabilitated. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves when we're this crowded is, how do you rehabilitate without the needed services? Because think about it, here's a nonviolent offender in a closed environment, and Senator DeBoer talked about this a little bit on the mic already this morning, is that you have that constant threat of physical violence when you're incarcerated. You have to worry about your store or personal items being stolen. And store is when you go and get yourself the cup of noodles, by the way, for those that aren't familiar with prison lingo. So here's somebody who's a nonviolent offender who comes into a very violent environment. And so how can you be rehabilitated when you're constantly in fear of something happening to you? And you have to understand that in Nebraska, incarceration does not live up to its stated purpose of rehab. And it doesn't do that because we have 3 voices in Nebraska. And again, data shows this. Tough on crime, incarcerate. Prisons aren't supposed to be comfortable, which I don't disagree with, by the way. And rehabilitate those people. But they don't understand that you can't rehabilitate those people in the environment that we have right now, or somewhere in between where you hear both voices, which I like to put myself in the middle. I hear both voices. But you have to know that not only are we failing the inmates, but at the end of the day, our prisons are consistently failing its employees as badly as those incarcerated. And I'm going to get back on here and I'm going to talk about what it is to be trained and work with these inmates, because I want you to have a clear understanding of what we go through as staff And why what Senator Lathrop is preaching this week is so important to all Nebraskans. Because I don't think people have a clear understanding. What you see on TV is not what you see in our prison system. This isn't some type of HBO special. You need to know what's going on, what isn't going on, what's working and what's not working, because it's got to be more about just locking people up. And you have to include the staff when we talk about this issue. And so with that, I'm going to get back into the queue and talk next about staffing.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to spend my time talking about the budget. And I know Senator Lathrop's got his issues he's working on, and I'm going to be listening, hopefully. But I just want to talk about the overall budget and how I'm looking at things this year. So in the past, we've held spending down to around that 3% number. And I thought we've passed some very responsible budgets. And what I think we're doing this year is, since we have lots of money, we're just going to spend lots of money. And we've found all sorts of places to spend it. We've got inflation hitting 40-year record highs, and we're just going to push more money into everything, and we're going to keep that inflation going for as long as we possibly can. If we don't cut back on our spending, you all know what's going to happen in 3 or 4 or 5 years when everything turns south and we're short of revenue again. We're going to build programs here that are going to keep getting funded. I know they're supposed to be one-time funding or limited amount of time, or they're pilot projects, but I can only recall one program in my 8 years here that we have actually cut and gotten rid of, and I think it saved the state $250,000. That's the only program we've ever gotten rid of. So we're going to keep adding things and doing more, and everybody's going to get used to having that more, and so down the road you'll keep funding it for more. So I think it's time to look at the budget numbers and see once what we're doing, and if we can't get the spending down to around that 3% again this year, well, know that inflation is going to kick in the future, but it's probably not quite here yet, but it's coming. So our costs are going to go up. And we're going to create all these new programs, and we're going to put money into housing. We already can't find enough builders to build houses. They can't get the supplies and the materials to build the house, but yes, we're going to throw 40, 50, 70, 80 million. I don't know what's all in between the budget and ARPA. We're going to build a lot of houses. And someday that housing market's going to break. And then we're going to break some more builders because there's going to be subdivisions sitting empty. We're not good at picking winners and losers. We're lousy at it. Business knows how to regulate itself better than we do. So I'm looking at the whole budget. I'm trying to sift through all the things that got plugged in there. And I'm going to start digging through them one at a time. And the issue is that we're going to run out of time on this floor to actually spend the time that we should, like we did yesterday, talking about each and every one of the departments that's getting funding increases of 20, 30, 40%. So as we go into this now, I mean, I know mainly this fight is about the prison issue, but to me, it's more about spending. I'm assuming that down the road, the prison system will get that worked out. There'll be an agreement made, but I'm looking at the overall spending of what we're doing. And everybody already is complaining that they're not getting enough for either North Omaha or South Omaha or Scottsbluff, Gehring, Grand Island. Everybody wants a spot at the trough. And I think we need to look at the budget a little more critically at the line items.
1 minute.
We can't be a little bit more judicious in how we're going to spend this money and what is our long-term goal for Nebraska. I tend to maybe look further into the future and see what are the issues we're dealing with and how are we solving that long-term problem of the depopulation of rural Nebraska, anything west of Lincoln, and how that's going to look in 20 or 30 years if we don't turn that around. But it's not what we're doing today. It's not what we're looking at, and nobody seems to really care. So as we whittle away our time, I'm going to be spending time talking about the budget and how we spend our money. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I don't think I'm going to be supporting this particular amendment of Senator Lathrop's, but there are others that he has filed that I am very interested in. However, I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about our criminal justice system. I made some notes last night. I was in the queue to talk before we adjourned last night. So I was making some notes about some of the things that were said yesterday about the criminal justice situation. And one of the questions that was asked on the floor was about a middle of the road solution. And isn't this a middle of the road solution in setting aside the money? A middle of the road solution for our criminal justice system requires more than one thing happening. It is such an enormous problem that it can't just be dealt with through the appropriations process. We need sentencing reform. We need investment in community programming. We need investment in social programs that elevate people out of poverty. We need investment in education and workforce. So the middle of the road solution or compromise or what have you is not to just appropriate $175 million and set it aside until certain benchmarks are met so that we can build another prison. And I think everyone agrees that a new facility needs to be built. But we, as everyone keeps saying, we are not going to build our way out of this problem. We have to take real strategic steps to fix our criminal justice system. It is not working. It is not working for those that are justice involved, and it is not working for the people of Nebraska. It is costing us way more money than it should because we aren't doing things the right way and the smart way. I agree a lot with what Senator Friesen was saying about long-term planning and a vision for Nebraska. We have an enormous amount of money right now, and there's a lot of fighting over it, and a lot of, as has been said numerous times, transformative policy, transformative projects. But who are they transformative for? We've had Senator McKinney and Senator Wayne do an in-depth presentation on how their project would be transformative for North Omaha. We have not had those same presentations from anyone else. No one else has to get up and defend every single dollar that they are asking for to this body because we don't have time. Well, if we don't have time, it does not hurt to not move things forward this year. This money is not going to go away before next year. If there are transformative projects that need to happen, we should be working on them and being judicious and diligent and thorough and studying what is the economic impact of these projects? Who are these projects going to serve? The ARPA dollars are meant to help those most adversely impacted by the pandemic. Are we doing that?
1 minute.
And I understand that we have all these cash fund, we have this great amount of cash fund dollars that we are using for some of these projects. But are these the right things for us to be using our cash fund dollars for? Are these going to be transformative for the people who live in poverty, Who is this transformative for? And how is this going to spur a better Nebraska for everyone? Those are questions that I want answers to. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator McKinney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. After we finished up and over the night and on my drive to Lincoln today, well, I support FA 74, but on my drive, I was thinking, and I guess I'll pose this question to the body. I'm not sure if people are paying attention, but raise your hand if you would like a prison built in your district. Raise your hand if you want a prison built in your district. Nobody raised their hand, but we got a $270 million plan to build a prison. Where is it going to go? Secondly, we cannot grow our way out of this. Again, I will repeat, even if we voted this year to build a prison, it would take 5+ years to build that prison. And in the current state of the world globally, in the supply chain and the war in Europe, it might take 10 years. So hypothetically, it take 10 years to build a prison. We still have an overcrowding crisis. The population is still going to grow. So you could say no to not passing reforms, but the reality is we have to do something. We can't just build our way out of this. Do you want the federal government to come in and take over our prisons? Because that's the route we're going to go if we elect to build a prison and not pass reforms. We really have to think about this. We have to be smart on criminal justice, not tough on crime. And Senator Friesen mentioned cutting back on spending. I think we should cut the whole set aside for $175 million out of wherever it's at and put it back into wherever we could put it so we can appropriate it this year so OFIC could get the $20 million that they need. So we could do the trails that are, $8 million. It's a bunch of other projects that $175 million could go to that don't have to go to prisons. So as we go through this day, if you stand up and talk about the prison, let's have a real conversation and let's not do a bunch of fear mongering and saying things about public safety. Good public safety is being smart on crime. Good public safety is making sure people have livable wage jobs, adequate housing, food on the table, proper education. That's public safety. That's what we have to think about. And again, I'll repeat, if you wasn't paying attention, President Trump a couple years ago passed the First Step Act. A lot of you support President Trump. First Step Act goes further than LB 920, but nobody wants to support LB 920. So tell me what's the issue? Think about that. And then, conversations about humanity and being humane. It's not humane to introduce bills that would disproportionately target mentally ill individuals in our communities, to charge them with felonies. It's not humane to say, let's charge people with substance abuses with felonies to hope that they get off the substances. That's not humane. We have to, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because it's election year or what. And maybe I just haven't been in the body long enough to fully understand that a lot of times when people stand up, I don't think they're speaking with logic and really thinking through the situation. In my experience growing up as a wrestler, I had to think through every situation. And also growing up in poverty, I had to think through every situation. And I just hope that you all think through every situation. We cannot build our way out of this. There are better solutions than building a prison.
1 minute.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Brandt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've had the opportunity to serve 4 years on the Judiciary Committee. And in those 4 years, it's been 4 years of corrections oversight. I appreciate that Senator Lathrop is bringing this up. This is a critical discussion that we're having. Would Senator Lathrop yield to a question?
Senator Lathrop, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Lathrop, we are opening a brand new prison this year out on Van Dorn Street. Can you tell me how many beds are in that prison and how that affects the existing operation of the state penitentiary?
I can. And looking at the chart, Senator Brandt, that we handed out, the largest increase in the red line is the proposed new prison, the net effect of the new prison. The one immediately before that is 384 beds that will be coming online. This legislature appropriated $50 million to add a high security housing unit with 384 beds. A number of us toured that about a month ago, and those will be coming online, I think, in about sometime this summer.
So then when those cells are maximum security cells, how does that affect the rest of the corrections operation?
Well, you have the opportunity to place people who are at that maximum security classification into appropriate or suitable cells. As I mentioned yesterday, the maximum security cell is the most expensive cell to construct. They have doors that slide. There's certain things that they have that, say, a minimum security cell would not. And that will, as you suggested, come online. That's on the LCC campus, the Lincoln Correction Center campus.
So Senator Friesen wants us to reduce spending, and I'm all for that. And Senator Lathrop, how would we do that in corrections? What is the cost to house a prisoner right now? And is there a cheaper way to handle that?
If you take great question. If you take the number of inmates that we have and divide it, that into the overall operating expenses, it's about $49,000 per person. So the cost of corrections, by the way, that number's gone up 50%. We used to be at 179 million in 2011. It's now up to 270 million. Our population is growing. It's getting, well, we've already talked about the growth. How do we save? Senator Stenner made this point in the Appropriations Committee. If we take a long-term approach and not just what's right in front of us, let's build a prison, that'll help. If we take a long-term approach just to 2030, and you say, how much capacity do we need in order to accommodate the projected population between now and 2030, it's twice what we're talking about. It's twice what we're talking about. So if you want to, and I don't have a problem fundamentally with the idea that we're going to build a facility that's more humane than the one we have, but these two topics are inextricably tied together. They're not separate issues, because if we don't do some form of reform, then we are looking at spending way more than $270 million if our effort is to build our way out of this. And Senator Brandt, at some point, the legislature will say, enough is enough.
1 minute.
I think we should be doing it today, this year, now, getting ahead of that and doing what other states have done to stop the growth.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Here's something you'll never hear in the Nebraska legislature. I want Alabama to be number one. This has been an ongoing fight between Nebraska and Alabama to see who has the most overcrowded corrections facility. When these new beds come online this summer, hopefully Alabama gets up there. When we talk about LB 920, our sentencing reform bill, hopefully that allows Nebraska to let some other states get ahead of us on prison overcrowding. It's pretty amazing when you see that the state of Texas has closed 8 prisons. A lot of southern states have closed prisons. We are one of the few states that wants to build prisons.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brandt and Senator Lathrop. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to make this point at this point in our debate on this topic. Right now, we're trying to share with you what the problem is. It's not that we don't have a solution. We'll get to a solution. We'll spend a good deal of today talking about this topic, and we'll talk about solutions that other states have adopted. Justice reinvestment, sentencing reform, and they've done it without impairing public safety. And the notion of justice reinvestment, colleagues, is that you are going to look at your prison population, who's coming in, how long are they staying, how soon do they come out, and what kind of services do they get when they leave, and also whether we can divert some of those people. That's the justice reinvestment process. The entire process presupposes that you're going to look at sentencing, which we did in the CJI process, and I'll get into that at some length as we go through this process. But for the moment, we're trying to give you information so that you understand what the problem is. The fact that it is a crisis, we can't, as you've heard a number of us say, we can't build our way out of this. Even if we doubled the proposal the governor currently has, we'd still need to build 200 beds a year. The 384 beds that don't really have a kitchen or any of that stuff, just the housing units, cost us $50 million to add 384 beds. So we don't want to go down that road. We recognize that we have a problem. We're going to talk about the solutions, but I think it's important that you understand every aspect of it. For those of you who are on the floor and those of you who are watching on the television, I want you to know something that we've done in my office to try to make it easier for you to follow along with some of the things we're going to talk about. We loaded the Judiciary Committee website with documents, and we're going to be talking about those documents. But if you're at home and you want to read any of these reports, read any of these studies, read any of these proposals, see any of the things we're talking about on the floor, you go to the legislature's website, and on the left margin, you'll find a link for committees. Hit the link, go to standing committees. Under standing committees, find judiciary, and that will link you to, at the bottom half of that, a section called Prison Corrections and Criminal Justice Documents, March 15th, 2022. That's going to have all of the studies, all of the things that we're going to be talking about, the CJI stuff, the governor's proposal, the Alvine engineering study. There's a number of things on there that if you want to get educated about this topic, you want to ask questions about this topic, or if we are talking about a particular report or particular work from CJI, you can follow along, you can read it, and you can ask questions, because this is the time. This is too important to not be engaged. It's too important not to be asking the difficult questions, so that we fully appreciate the crisis we have and the necessity to act and the solution. And colleagues, just to preview the solutions that came out of the efforts of the CJI work group. This CJI and justice reinvestment have been into 13 other states before they got to Nebraska. Before they could come here, we did our due diligence. These guys have been in conservative states. They've been in South Dakota. They've been in other places, Utah, for example, that had a very similar situation where they needed to build more capacity, and they brought CJI in, and it helped with that entire process to assure that they were building what they needed and not more than they needed, and they did reforms, and they are doing it without sacrificing public safety. The solutions that we will talk about as the day goes on do not sacrifice public safety. It is about investing our tax dollars more wisely. I sometimes make this illustration. If we're going to have somebody spend 20 years in prison, will we get what we need out of that if we have them spend 19 years in prison and spend $50,000 or $49,000 on that person's rehabilitation or on their release transition services?
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I got a couple of things to say about the prison, but I thought I would start with Senator Friesen and I feel like often we are, I don't know, in singing terms, are singing a duet or something. Senator Friesen and I feel like talk about a lot of the same topics, but not in the exact same way. but one of the things I wanted to talk about was in the budget forecast, revenue forecast talks about the amount of federal funds that have come into the state over the last several years. A total of $24 billion was allocated to the state of Nebraska in multiple forms. To put that in perspective, this is the equivalent of 22% of the total state personal income, and thus is not unique to Nebraska, as most all other states are experiencing the same revenue growth. That's relevant because we're talking about these, we have more money for the floor. We're talking about spending money into the future, and what is a reliable prediction about what the future holds. And obviously, we need to make sure that we are recognizing that these years with the 13% and the 10% growth are aberrations, divergence from the norm. And one of the reasons for that is 22% of the personal income, which means the basis of income tax, came from federal money coming into the state. And that as the downside is that the large amounts of federal funding assistance is temporary, and the high revenues attributed to circulating a large amount of federal funds is also likely to be temporary, leading to a low growth or decline of revenue over the next 2 to 3 years. Those are important things to consider as we talk about this budget. We talk about investments, huge investments in the future, like the canal, like the lakes, like a prison. These are huge costs that we're talking about undertaking at the moment because we have money, but they will have ongoing costs. They will have additional costs in the future that we need to make sure that we are recognizing that we need to be more cautious. We need to be more conservative about what spending we're undertaking in the long term. Senator Friesen's right? We shouldn't be spending money just to spend money. We should be as conservative with the money as possible. We should only spend money that we need to spend. But really, I think this is a relevant point that we need to keep in mind as we talk about this, as we talk about revenue bills going forward. But I wanted to mention this because I was listening to NPR, the radio on the drive-in this morning, and there was a story about student loan forbearance or the moratorium on paying student loans, and about how that is another program that is set to stop. The federal government's going to stop their moratorium sometime soon, and that individuals who are not currently paying their student loans are going to have to pay them again. And that can be hundreds, if not $1,000 a month that individuals are now be able to use for rent, for utilities, for groceries, for other expenses that they are then putting back into our economies. And so that's not factored into the $24 billion that has been put into the Nebraska economy. So that number is actually even higher. And again, it's another amount of money that we are currently getting from the federal government that we're putting into the state economy that is causing these increased revenues that are temporary, and that we need to make sure we are considering as we talk about these long-term outlays. And so, as Senator Lathrop said, we will get on to talking about solutions at some point here, because there are a number of them that have been proposed that are reasonable, that have been undertaken by states like Texas, Tennessee, Utah. But it is always good when having a big discussion to frame the argument.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the context of what is the problem. The issue presented is that we have a prison overcrowding problem. That will cost us a huge amount of money going in the future if we don't take a different approach. There is an option available that is perhaps not the entire solution, but it is part of the solution and is a step in the right direction, which is LB 920 that hopefully we'll get to in the near coming days. But that is one step in that direction to take the action that is necessary to prevent us from having to make further huge investments in building prisons and incarceration going forward. And so it's important to understand the lay of the land as a whole as we talk about all of these issues and how they interplay with each other. And so I think that is part of this topic, and I will push my light and get back in the back of the queue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Arch, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have some questions for Senator Stinner, if he would yield.
Senator Stinner, would you yield?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Senator Skinner, you and I have had conversations about the percent increase for some of the providers. Bill, actually rate increases. While the intention is that this be used for increase in wages, there's really not any way that well, let me just ask the question. Is there any way that we can be assured that these dollars will go to an increase in wages, or are these simply to the organizations, to the provider organizations themselves? They will decide whether it goes to wages or used for any other purposes.
I'm trying to think of exactly the way that works is reimbursement rates for different levels of care. And obviously the funding would go to an institution that is having it's actually structured toward institutions that have more Medicaid patients, so that there's a bias toward that. With that in mind, then the reimbursement rates are less than certainly private pay and less than Medicare, but Medicare usually only covers for 30 to 60 to 90 days.
Right.
I'm not sure that I have a methodology or a mechanism to command them to use it for frontline pay, but that's where the weakness is today. That's where they have to have staffing in order to build their census back up, which is related to how much revenue they can produce.
Right. And when you were approached by providers, by organizations requesting the increase in the rates, there was discussion of the state has raised their rates for 24/7 providers. Therefore, it's extremely difficult for us now to recruit. And so the discussion was that it was wage inflation that was driving this percent increase. Is that correct?
It would, well, I'll tell you what was driving a wage increases and competing. The McDonald's and some of those other types of institutions were actually poaching some of their labor. Some of it retired and stayed home. But it really was the fact that there's tons and tons of vacancies. I'm talking specifically about nursing homes, that they need to have a wage increase to attract and retain the staff they have, and then try to attract new staff so that they could bring those folks back from the other institution where they went, to make them more competitive. It's similar to and I think it has worked if you look at what's happening to the Carnegie Hospital now is almost fully staffed. Obviously, increases in wages help corrections. So
Right.
That would be primary examples that you can really cite that this is an effective tool.
Well, I know over the summer, one of the LRs that we had at the HHS committee was on developmental disabilities, and a provider association came in and said that they were running about 30% vacancy in their staffing, to the point that they were not able to accept new referrals off of this registry that we've talked about before on this floor, and they had to put a hold on it because they weren't able to take more of the individuals with disabilities. So, I mean, I understand the issue. I guess my question is, my pause is that I would like to be able to say that this is to be used for wage increase. But what happens is when you do the 15% or whatever that percentage is, it goes to the rate, not to the wage. Unlike the state, when the state raises wages, they can of course direct it to their employees and raise those wages, not to the department, where the department does it all and the wages never trickle down. So I guess my question is, should we be building any other language into this bill that either builds intent language in, or something that can direct that these dollars be used for increase in wages? Because that's, I believe, what our intent is, and perhaps we can discuss some of that off the mic here. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Arch and Senator Stinner. Senator Bostelman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Nebraska. Good morning, colleagues. I'll follow up a little bit with what Senator Arch is talking about, and I agree with him wholeheartedly in the sense is there something needs to be done there, because there is a significant need. I think Senator Aguilar had an LR this interim, and I went out to the Kearney Veterans Home, the state-run Veterans Home out in Kearney. And my dad is in that facility right now. And the thing is that they have a significant need for staffing. And part of that challenge was how much they're getting paid. So that increase in pay has really made a difference out there for them. It really makes a change to bring more staff in, because it was a significant issue for them. And this helps them out a great deal to bring additional staffing into that facility. It's needed because they can only fill so many beds with the staff they have. And we can serve more veterans in this state if we have additional staffing. And when you're paying less than what the local community does in skilled nursing facilities, it's hard to fill those positions. On the second note I want to talk about on this one a little bit is I have an issue that we're dealing with the Kearney Veterans Home, which I think needs to be looked at, and maybe we'll look at over the interim. So they've increased the cost for a veteran to be in that home 5.9% this year. Why? Why are we increasing 5.9% for our veterans who need that care the most, and the state's providing majority of the cost or for the pay for that? What is that going to? Are we just raising it because I think every veteran or spouse of a veteran that's in that home is more than willing to pay their fair share. Don't get me wrong. That's not the issue. The issue is you're there in less than a year and they're going to raise your rate 5.9%, 6%. And when we look at our budget here and when we look at other agencies, we want them to hold down their budgets. We want them to hold down their costs. Why is it that in this facility or these facilities across the state, there's that much of an increase all at one time? To me, we should be in that 3% or less if you're going to do that. If we're going to provide, if we've made that decision as a state to provide these homes for our veterans, to provide funding in those things to offset some of those costs for those veterans, which we're very much so appreciative of, why are we having such a significant increase for these? And the initial talks I know I've had with them, well, that's because industry-wise, and that's what everybody else does. This is what we have to do. Well, I'm not so sure we have to. So what are those increases? Well, if they're meds, doesn't Medicaid pay for that? Medicare, whatever, aren't there funds, federal funds coming into that facility to pay for those costs? If it's not for upkeep and maintenance, my understanding, although we do have a problem with that, I think in the state, and I know we have that problem. When I was on the building maintenance committee, we went to Bellevue, to the home over there. They had problems with their HVAC system after it was newly constructed, that it wasn't done right. But did we hold the contractor responsible to fix it? No. So out in Kearney, we have issues with concrete, we have issues with doors, we have issues with ceiling, with the roof that's leaking. Do we hold the contractor responsible for it? Contractor who built it responsible for it? No. So we have to pay for that. So with that part of it is, I think that's maybe something in government military affairs we need to take a look at, is how do we keep contractors responsible for the work? Is there some type of a warranty system that we can put in place, some type of a guarantee that within a year or two or whatever, we don't have problems? We don't have a HVAC system that doesn't provide heating and cooling to rooms that's required, or that we don't have we have doors that will open and close or lock properly, or that concrete isn't heaving in areas, or the roof isn't leaking. Shouldn't we have those things? But I'll come back to the original reason why I come up and talk. And it's, again, I think that 5.9%, I think that's something that needs to be looked at, needs to be considered. I think that's too much of a jump in 1 year or less than 1 year for our veterans who are in that home. If we're there to provide a service for them, if we're there to take care of them and help them with their spouses, I think that really needs to be looked at. And I don't think that's proper. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bostoman. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, colleagues, I'm ruining my low average for times at the mic per amendment on this one right here. The reason is we need help. We need a plan. I'm going to say that every time I get up on the mic today. We need a plan. We need a whole plan for how to deal with the entire overcrowding problem in our prison system. The black dotted line that we have here, we need it to be under the red line. The red line is how many beds we have. The black line is how many people are coming into our prisons. The black line needs to be under the red line, not just once, not just dipping under there one time. We need the black line to be perpetually under the red line. We need to do that. It would take building 200 beds a year. Can you imagine that? We added these 384 or 6, I can't remember which, beds. But as Senator Lathrop pointed out, we didn't have the kitchens and all the other pieces to add. This was just the dormitory part. This is an expensive proposition to add 200 beds every year for, I guess, ever. We have got to figure out a way to make our growth in our prison population slow down. We've got to find a way to make the black line representing the growth go underneath the red line representing how many beds we have. What is our plan for doing so? Talk about building this prison right now. It feels a little like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And it's important to have the right facilities. I get that. That isn't a premise that I am against. What I am against is rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic when we know the problem exists. My very first hearing 4 years ago, can we build our way out of it? No, we cannot. We talked about the things around the edges that we were doing, making sure that certain kinds of programs get done, things like that. And I remember saying, and I remember this because I learned not to say pithy things unless I wanted them quoted by the press. I remember saying, it sounds like we are installing fireproof tiles and we're in a burning building. The time to install fireproof tiles is not after the building is halfway burned down around you. We need a whole plan. What is the plan? All we're doing right now is getting a better view of the iceberg as we're sitting on the side of the Titanic. And that's a problem. What is the plan? The whole plan. Senator Lathrop, would you yield to a question?
Senator Lathrop, would you yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator Lathrop, in the CJI process, I was not on that committee. In the CJI process, did you come up with recommendations?
Yes.
1 minute.
Yes, they did.
And would those recommendations help us, or would they get us to a place where the black line is under the red line? Our prison expectation of population is below the capacity that we have?
It could. It depends on how soon the benefit of those proposals would be realized relative to the opening of the new facility. But yes, if we flattened the line, if we adopted all of the CJI proposals, and they're for the most part all in LB 920, it would effectively flatten our rate of growth to almost zero in terms of our rate of growth. And if we did that and built the new facility, we would be out of an overcrowding emergency, I believe.
That sounds like the closest thing to a plan for getting out of an overcrowding emergency that I've heard since I've been in here.
Time,
Thank you.
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator DeVore and Senator Lathrop. Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I still stand in support of Senator Lathrop's efforts, but also support both the amendment and the underlying bill, because I know that we need to move forward on many of the issues within that bill. But with that said, Senator Lathrop has had a plan for a really long time. When Senator Lathrop was here previously, he pushed, he educated, he worked with the executive branch, and it fell on deaf ears, as many of the issues in Nebraska have done. We've allowed issues to fester over decades. The problems that we are experiencing now that we're trying to build our way out of happened decades ago. How long are we going to wait? When I was closing the first time I was up, I talked about how at the end of the day, prisons fail not only those incarcerated, but also those that are employed. We've known for a really long time that they were underpaid there in the state prison system. And by the way, so are our state employees. We are losing state employees at a very high rate because they can get $5 to $10 more an hour in the private sector. So there's your next big issue that you're gonna have to start looking at when we look at the budget in the future. Senator Brewer and I were just talking, going back to staff, about something that people have to understand in this body. So much like the military, when you are trained to work at the prison, you are trained to be desensitized and you are trained to compartmentalize. Because when you run to break up a fight, you can't pause and take a step back because there are other people running with you or running behind you. And you have to make sure that you complete your mission. That mission is to break up that fight. That mission is to make sure there isn't a riot. That mission is to provide aid to somebody that needs help. You don't get to think about whether you're going to be harmed or if anybody else is going to be harmed. You just have to make sure that you do your mission to try and prevent those things from happening. And so I want you to think about it. You have staff in these overcrowded facilities, worst case scenario. Inmates in these overcrowded facilities, worst case scenario. But we're not doing anything to get people out of those facilities. And so as a result, you have inmates with PTSD. You have staff with PTSD. You have inmates with abuse issues. And, you know, let's be honest, we know that there is contraband that comes into the prison. Otherwise, we wouldn't do cell shakedowns. And we know that staff is dealing with issues. I know from when I was at the prison that there are 2 people that I worked with that have been incarcerated since that time. They made bad decisions. I can tell you when I worked there that there was always a demographic that went out to drink every single night after we got off work. Because much like the military, the only people that really understand what you go through are the people that you actually work with. Think about it. You're in this fishbowl all day long. And those incarcerated have nothing but time on their hands because we're not doing a good job of keeping them busy or rehabilitating them. And so they have nothing but time on their hands to figure out how to screw you over. And they're pretty smart about it and pretty clever.
1 minute.
What Senator Lathrop has offered for as long as I can remember is that how do we sort out who's really dangerous and who is not? And how do we provide services to those that are not dangerous and appropriate sentencing? Pretty simple. But yet we've taken these simple solutions and we always go back to the same thing. We have to be tough on crime. We have to be tough on crime. We absolutely have to be tough on crime, folks. But if we don't rehabilitate those that are committing these crimes, these people, as you already heard Senator DeBorsey on the mic today, will one day be your neighbors. Do you want them rehabilitated? Or do you want them to come back into our community being better criminals because, hey, they learn a lot when they're in prison about how to commit better crimes? Or do you want them paying taxes, contributing to society, and being good neighbors? This is the decision that we're faced with. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Pansing Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'm going to have to repeat the vicious cycle again because that's what we've been talking about since 2015. The vicious cycle is that we have overcrowding, which leads to understaffing, and then we have because of the understaffing, we have a lack of programming because there are not enough officers and staff members to be able to take the prisoners to the programming they need. And then there are also not enough rooms for the prisoners and the inmates to be able to go to that programming. So since we have a lack of programming, the inmates do not get the programming they need. And so then they end up being denied parole eligibility. And at that point, then they end up jamming out without the programming necessary to make them safer members of our community. And once they jam out without that programming, what happens then is that we have recidivism because they haven't been trained or helped or had any of the programming that they need. And then guess what? Once we have recidivism, they come back into the prisons and continue to add to our overcrowding problem. So in 2015, when I first came to the legislature, then chair of Judiciary, former Senator Seiler, asked me to lead a group to study both sentencing and programming and look at sentencing reform and programming within the prisons. Those are the two key issues that are affecting our overcrowding problems right now. And we continue not to address those issues. As Senator Brandt said, Texas is closing their prisons. I looked up an article about that, and one article it's from the Ambassador Antonio Garza. As Texas prison population shrinks, the state is closing more lockups. And what that article says is the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's executive director, Brian Collier, said diversion, treatment, diversion is part of sentencing reform, diversion, treatment, that's included in programming, and education programs, as well as a low rate of getting people sent back to prison led to the decision to close prisons. This decreasing demand for secure housing and projected stability in the offender population makes possible the decision to reduce state spending through the closure of excess correctional capacity, Collier said in a statement. Quote, the agency can close these facilities without negatively affecting public safety or causing any loss of jobs. Crime rates have also decreased in Texas, according to reports from the Texas Department of Public Safety. And prison reform advocates say prisoners are being approved for parole at a higher rate this year. There's our issue. But instead, we're just on the mantra, let's just spend more money. Spend more money, build more prisons, don't deal with the issue. That's like having a child and saying, quit jumping off the balcony and breaking your arm so your arm doesn't break, and instead just continue to fix the arm and let the child jump off the balcony. This is folly. We have done this since I've been in here. We refuse to look at the issues that cause the overcrowding and the need for building more prisons.
1 minute.
Those issues resolve around sentencing reform and programming early in an inmate's time in prison in order to be able to solve the problems and bring people into our communities who are safer and easier to live by as neighbors. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Panzing Brooks. Members, Senator Geist would like to introduce 9 members all across Nebraska of the Legislative Field Experience. They are seated in the north balcony. Would you please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature? Returning to debate, Senator McAllister, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I love the metaphors we're coming up with to describe our criminal justice system. Rearranging the decks on the chairs on the Titanic, falling off of a balcony. Maybe I'll try using the flow of water. Water comes into a dam and leaves the dam. If the dam is too small, the dam bursts. Maybe we could draw an analogy to our criminal justice system. I love the discussion we had yesterday about the budget. It was informative. Some of my favorite senators, Senator Erdman, Senator Ben Hansen, were taking detailed look at the budget. And we talked about trails, and we talked about Stratcom. We talked about the Perkins project. But here we have a situation on our hands dealing with a criminal justice system is a huge problem we really haven't dealt with. We didn't deal with it during the administration of Governor Heinemann, and Governor Ricketts hasn't dealt with it either. When I was at the Platt Institute, we would look at problems through the eyes of federalism. And there's always a state that's doing something right. And I would contend that Nebraska is not handling its criminal justice system right. We've talked about Texas, and Texas has done something right. Here we've got Texas, one of the most conservative states in the country, and they're dealing with the criminal justice system in a positive way. How come we can't take that very same lesson and do that here in Nebraska? I don't understand. This is a smart legislature. During the time that I've been here, the budget has been under control, 2 or 3% only. We had to cut $1 billion out of the budget while I was here. Now we have an unusual situation, but we also have a problem that we just haven't dealt with in at least a couple of decades, and it's now time to deal with it. There's a path forward, and that's using federalism, using the plan that we developed from the criminal justice system, and looking at 920 when it comes to the body, because I think that is the way we need to go. During my time here, and just the last couple of years, I've put in 4 or 5 bills dealt with the criminal justice system. LB 114 would allow those who have received set-asides on their convictions the opportunity to petition the sentencing judge to seal the records. That's a good idea. LB 130, an amendment proposed by the Judiciary Legal Counsel to require the Board of Parole to have at least one member of professional experience treating mental illness on substance abuse. LB 269 require the Board of Parole to yearly review all committed offenders who've been incarcerated for more than 30 years, and require the board to annually publish a list of those committed offenders who are 60 years or over. Senator McKinney had this very same idea, and it's a credible, good idea that we should follow up on. Another one, LB 1031, to ensure reasonably priced phone call rates for inmates. Inmates need to stay in contact with their families, and when we overprice that service, it makes it difficult for the families and the inmates to stay in contact. And when that occurs, when they can't stay in contact with their families, they're more likely to reoffend and end up back in jail. So let's have this very necessary discussion. Wait for 920 to come to the floor and make the changes that we need to make. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McAllister. Senator Walls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am really glad that Senator McKinney brought up who in this body would like to raise their hand and say, we want a prison in our community. Because as a representative of Fremont, a representative of my community, I have to stand up and tell you that Fremont does not want a prison. And they have some really good reasons why. I've been working with my community economic development groups, my business community, and my mayor, and it is clear to me that Fremont does not feel they have the workforce to staff a new prison. With all the investments and the incentives that we've made to make sure, or that we've made, I think it's really important that we can assure the businesses like Holstone and Lincoln Premium Poultry, lots of investment, lots of incentives were given to those businesses to come to Fremont. Don't you think we should make sure that we have the workforce for them so they don't leave? Wholestone Foods or Wholestone Farms will be adding, they're adding an addition to their plant. And that means that they will add a second shift by 2025, meaning they will need to fill hundreds of jobs. Lincoln Premium Poultry has been a great addition to our economy locally and across the state. And they are still in need of employees. Lincoln Premium Poultry and Wholestone Foods, as well as many other manufacturing and businesses, have invested millions of dollars into our economy. And again, shouldn't we make sure that we are doing exactly what we can to keep them? There's also a future Port Authority project that my community is pretty darn excited about, bringing hundreds of jobs in. Altogether, Fremont could possibly need about 3,500 jobs that need to be filled. And what about the staff in Lincoln at the prisons? I mean, what are the staff in Lincoln supposed to do? Drive an hour to Fremont, drive an hour home? Experienced staff that we have in Lincoln. Honestly, we do not have the workforce in Fremont for a prison. And we certainly do not want a prison without a solid plan to reduce recidivism and implement quality training plans and supports and resources to reduce recidivism. I want to go to the plan for a minute and ask Senator Lathrop if he would yield to some questions.
Senator Lathrop, would you yield?
Yes, I will.
Thank
I'm
you,
happy to.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. I've spent some time looking through the Nebraska Criminal Justice Reinvestment Work Group. And I have to say that, you know, in the acknowledgements, it seems to me like there are a lot of experts who have given input. Can you just talk about the process of this work group?
Yes, that's certainly on my list of things to talk about, and I'll try to give a
1
big
minute.
overview. The three branches of government, the legislative, the judicial with the Supreme Court, and the executive branch with the governor, invited CJI in. CJI's been in about 13 states. They go through people's data or states' data on corrections, probation, parole, incarceration, diversion, all those things, how long people stay, how they get out, when they get out, whether they get parole at what rate, and whether they're successful on parole. They bring all that information back to the group and share it. We have two, and it's in the Judiciary Committee's website, the two slideshows that they presented to the larger group so that we understood the data relative to the state of Nebraska and the Department of Corrections and our criminal justice system. From there, the large group of about 15 split up into three different groups, each focused on—
Senator. Thank you, Senator Walz and Senator Lathrop. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. So I've been going through and notating the budget, this AM 1999, which I just realized is a Prince song. So I'm going through and looking at this budget, and I'm highlighting all the things that are new. And here's the rub for me, colleagues. For years, if not decades, the Nebraska Legislature has chosen not to prioritize the people that are most vulnerable over economic development, tax cuts, projects. And I look through this and I see that there are some increases to essential things like childcare reimbursements, provider rates for Medicaid. But those are things that should have been done years ago, and we aren't even catching up to where they should be with this bill. we're just catching up to where they should have been years ago. And so we're still running from behind on these things. And this budget, this transformational budget that has hundreds of millions of dollars going to projects that are in the interest of various members of this legislature. And we have not hundreds of millions of dollars going to affordable childcare, accessible childcare, housing, food banks, SNAP, minimum wage, transportation, broadband. Instead, we are spending money without being judicious about how we're doing so. Last year, I read the article from ALEC about Texas. I believe Senator Pansing Brooks was reading it earlier. I have a copy of it here. Texas made transformational reform in criminal justice by doing sentencing reform, by doing what LB 920 seeks to do, and they end up saving hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions of dollars that they save that they can put into projects like building a canal or a lake or an amusement park, whatever, trails. If we were to treat the people that are most vulnerable in our state with dignity and elevate them, we would all do better. Senator McKinney asked at the start of this morning for any senator to raise their hand if they would want a prison built in their district. I'd like to know, is there any senator that would like to have a hospital built in their district? I'm not going to raise my hand because I have 2 hospitals in my district and it's very condensed, so I don't think that we could have space for another one. But does anybody else want a hospital in their district? Because we have money to build a facility that can house 1,500 people. Why are we not talking about a 1,500 person mental health facility? That would be transformational for the state. We know for a fact that people who are incarcerated are much more likely to have severe mental health issues. A mental health facility would serve the state better than a new prison. Sentencing reform would serve the state better.
One minute.
Thank you. And when we talk about making a new building a new prison, it is very disingenuous to talk about the old prison, the current prison. Yeah, it's an old facility. It is an old facility. And the people that are there should have a nicer place to live, but we're not talking about reducing the prison size. We're talking about expanding the prison size. So saying, shouldn't they have a new place to live? Sure, but you still want to be able to incarcerate more of them and do nothing about the problem. And that is problematic. We need to be smarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Got it. Thank you, President Williams. Members of the committee, I just wanted to weigh in here on a couple different things because as much as judiciary, and I appreciate everything that they've done, have seen this problem, have been working on the issue and are trying to do everything they can. And, look, I support 920 for many practical reasons, mostly fiscal. And here's the reason why. For years, the Appropriations Committee has been receiving reports for our spending. The fiscal office has been with us every single step of the way. We have grossly underspent in corrections. It's not a question of if it's true or not, it is factual. For years, we have underspent in corrections. And the major reason we've underspent has been because of staffing. We haven't been getting out. We had many FTEs at all levels that remained unfilled. Now, the importance behind this is they've been unfilled for years, and what we continue to do every single year was carry over the reappropriations. This is an enduring issue and problem. Part of it had to do with our salary and our pay wasn't keeping up with many of the other competing jobs that those individuals are working in our prisons can take up. Now, the importance behind that is we on the Appropriations Committee were really fighting for this for years. Senator Wishart was fighting for a while when we were trying to do some competitive pay. And at the end of the day, it took this to really try to push for more pay. Now, we're finally increasing pay. I think that's great. I think the thing that people need to realize is that that's in a time of inflation. We've increased pay within time of inflation. It's only a matter of time when the pay everywhere else becomes more competitive and we're not as competitive anymore. At any given time, we had anywhere between 15 to 19 million in reappropriations just in the prisons corrections budget for about 4 years while I've been on the budget committee that they were unable to spend. Up and down, from mental health facilities to people that are supervisors to entry-level officers, we couldn't find them. That is not a problem that is being solved yet. It's a problem that we've made a step in the right direction, but it's going to continue on. And this is kind of what Senator Boers, we don't have a plan. These things are going to continue on. So when inflation does what it's doing right now, making it a lot harder and our affordability being a lot harder, that means we're going to have a pay problem and a human assets problem in terms of the number of people that are going to actually be working in our correction system. And now we're talking about building a new prison. The new prison is going to be about 70% medium and high security beds. We've heard many people talk on the floor that we have about 1,000 over capacity right now. And most of those aren't medium and high security individuals. But we're going to build a prison that's going to meet a need that we don't currently have as much. So the only solution is going to be in about 4 to 5 years to build, even sooner, to build another prison that is going to cost the taxpayers more, that's going to cost more staff, that we are not entirely sure that we can fill those staffing needs unless we also continue to increase pay a lot more. And I hope that's the continued plan of the future administration.
1 minute.
That is the only way that we can handle this, and that is just going to equal more and more dollars. We have a real opportunity to do something. Step back, plan, look at reform, try to make sure to slow the curve. I don't think that part of this is rocket science. It's whether or not we invest in it. At the end of the day, every priority we want costs money. And this is going to be an increasing wedge in our costs for our budget from here on in. And if we're not accounting for it, what we do now is going to decide whether or not we're allowing that wedge to continue to supersede every other major priority we have for the state of Nebraska. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. Colleagues, this is actually the first time I've been able to get up and speak on LB 1011. And I want to rise and kind of continue the discussion that Senator Lathrop and others have been leading on kind of the notion of our state capacity and state priorities and state institutions. One thing that I did want to say and address is I believe Senator Michaela Cavanaugh just asked, would anybody volunteer for a new hospital in their district? And I would. I was way back by the printer, so I'm not sure if that was seen. But we've got space in District 26, and I think that's something that the state should really look in investing in. I do think increasing the amount of kind of inpatient mental health beds the state guarantees and state provides would be very transformational. And that is something that I've been working on. I'm kind of remiss that I didn't propose an outright appropriation this year. But that's something that I think this body is going to have to seriously look at and consider, hopefully in the next few years as we learn more and more. And part of the reason for that, and part of the reason I want to talk about that is, in addition to the prison overcrowding, we're running into a tough situation in which we are kind of at capacity and risk of overcrowding at many of our county jails and our county facilities. And the difficulty there is, of course, the county boards are in charge of managing and building and constructing these facilities and running them, but they're not the ones that pass crimes. They are all there on either state crimes or in a few places, city municipal violations. They're either pretrial detainees awaiting trial, kind of regardless of whether or not they're going to get sentenced to probation, jail at the state pen, prison at the state pen, jail in the county jail, whether it's a misdemeanor or felony, as well as people who are carrying out, generally misdemeanor sentences, and now after 605, some parole violations. And I bring all of this up in the sense of if the state continues to neglect our mental health obligations, specifically for competency restoration, we are going to only exacerbate that and make that problem worse, in the sense that there is a considerable portion of people waiting to go to a state-run or allocated or contracted mental health bed who have no other place to go, so they sit at the county jail up until then. On competency issues alone, which per our state law is a state responsibility managed by DHHS, on that issue alone, we have at this point, over 70 people on wait lists, often waiting over 120 days or thereabouts. That's a cost and an obligation that the counties are picking up solely because the state has not figured out a way to provide adequate mental health capacity for those. And the difficulty there is, of course, we have a finite amount of actual state institutions, basically the Lincoln and Norfolk regional centers, and those have to divide up between a wide variety of things, including mental health board commitments, other issues, competencies, and other groups. And to bring all that up to say is obviously we are dealing with this layer and this lens at all different issues. Not all different issues, but all different layers of the state. Certainly concerns about the obligations and continued kind of trend we see of incarceration, and what impact that's going to all have on our individual counties and what all expenses that's going to have on them, as well as at the state level. And so that's something that in terms of my career and what I've focused on, I've often focused with the county board, my Lancaster County board has been very proactive at trying to reduce some of these wait times, get people to state care faster, get people to their court date in an appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. President. In ways to kind of simply stop some of the bureaucracy that is increasing capacity at county jails. But that's not even getting to any of the potential impacts that any sort of reforms to our criminal justice system. This is just simply overcoming, wait times for hearings, wait times for the regional center. And that is actually a considerable portion of what's happening at our county jails, which are, at least in my area, getting full. And that's, I think, an issue rising across the state. Some of this issue is simply just our capacity to state level, whether it's mental health beds, whether it's access to the courts, all sorts of things, is leading down to increased issues at the county level. And that's something this body is going to have to continue to look at. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Coulterman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the process that we've been through on this and what Senator Lathrop's been talking about. I've had the privilege to serve here now. This is my 8th year, and 11 of us are going to be leaving this year. Since we've been here, we've allocated 808 the money for 808 beds in the prison. 808 new beds, and we haven't moved the needle. I have the privilege of sitting on appropriations, and I come from a business background, and I don't know, just because I'm retired and I'm here doesn't mean you lose your business acumen. So as I think about how this has all come down, for 2 years now, we spent $300,000 for a reclassification of our prison population through UNO. We're waiting on the results of that. We've done facility study updates, and we're supposed to get a new one in August. We spent $15 to $18 million on design and land options. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if we really want to approach this from a business perspective and manage the taxpayers' dollars in a prudent way, we have to have all the information in front of us as to how we're going to fix the problem. And we don't have that information. We're waiting on the information. So in the meantime, we as appropriators have given the $15 to $18 million. We've put the $300,000 out there to get the proper information. We've set aside $170 million in a cash account, And we're getting it ready so that those of you that are going to be here next year and the year after will have the ability to make prudent decisions based on facts and figures and maybe move the needle. I'm anxious to hear Bill 920 when it comes to the floor. From what I understand, we can't build our way out of this. I mean, we've seen that. And I'm not against building a new prison if it's going to improve the quality of life for those that are there. But at the same time, let's make sure that people are classified where they need to be, and let's upgrade. But I'm not in favor of just building a prison to build a prison. So again, I just try and bring a perspective to it that's a business perspective. I believe people support the idea if they have the right information in front of them. With that, I would hope that you would support the bill that we have up there, LB 1011, AM 1999. And I'd yield the rest of my time to Senator McKinney if you'd like to have it.
Senator McKinney, you're yielded 2 minutes, and you're also next in the queue then.
Thank you. Again, I rise again in support of FA 74 and continues this discussion about this prison that is proposed for our state. Again, I'll repeat that the $175 million that is set aside for this prison can be used for many projects within our state, whether that's a trail or a project at Offutt or anywhere else. The money also could go to the lake, since we want to build lakes this year. But we cannot build ourselves out of this problem. It's just impossible. When you look at the data and look at the facts, we cannot build ourselves out of this. So we're either going to ignore the facts or look at the facts and be strategic and come up with a smart plan to address this problem.
1 minute.
And that's our responsibility as representatives of our districts and of this state, is to take a strategic and thoughtful approach at criminal justice and at this conversation about the prison, because it just doesn't make sense. Again, even if we were to agree to build a prison, it would take 5+ years. Supply chain is messed up. There's a war in Europe. Might take longer. The prisons will still be overcrowded. So what should we do? Just allow the prisons to stay overcrowded? And we're talking about being humane and humanity? Really think about that. I really hope you do. Because if you don't, then it just shows me that you're just willing to ignore the facts because someone wants to build a prison on his way out of office.
Time, Senator, but you may continue on your own time.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I guess since nobody has stood up to say whether or not they want a prison in their district, I'll just ask a couple people. Would Senator Clements yield to a question?
Senator Clements, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Clements, do you think it's a good idea to build, because they would like to build a prison supposedly between Omaha and Lincoln, and I'm looking at this map and I'm just wondering, would District 2, your district, be willing to accept a prison?
I'd have to ask them, but generally I would say most people would not invite a prison.
All right, thank you, Senator. Would Senator Aguilar?
Senator Aguilar, would you yield?
I will.
Senator Aguilar, do you think it would be a good idea to build a prison in Grand Island?
Well, the school of thought in Grand Island is they would look for anything that has to do with economic development. They very well might, but I'm sure there would be dissension on both sides of that issue.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, well, also, I was thinking about it and I heard somebody say we need to be tough on crime. Well, I've been alive almost 32 years and we've been tough on crime in this nation for almost 32 years or longer. And where has that gotten us? Prison overcrowding, 10th highest Black incarceration rate in the United States. So if tough on crime is acceptable, just say it's acceptable that we have prison overcrowding. It's acceptable that we have the 10th highest Black incarceration rate in the nation. Just stand up and say it. Please, we cannot be tough on crime. It's not smart at all. We have to be smart We have to really think about this. I don't care whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent. I really don't care. Let's really think about what we're doing. And just saying these things just because somebody might smack a mailer out about you or somebody might not vote for you doesn't make sense to me. I just don't think it's humane or morally right to continue to keep advocating for this approach, and we see what the results are. We have to take $175 million that is set aside for this prison, which I don't think is a great idea, and we could use it for many things. It could go to Offutt, it could go to the trail, it could go to the canal, it could go to the lake. Why does it have to go to a prison that's going to take 5 years to build, doesn't even help us because we'll have to build another prison? People aren't willing to even accept any type of reforms because they're scared of the police. I don't know why, because I'm gonna just say my words for them. But anyway, it just doesn't make sense. Let's just be smart. Please, let's have a real conversation about this. And if anybody else is willing to, say that they would like a prison in their district, please stand up and say it. And I hope that you could explain why. Economic development doesn't have to be a prison. It could be a bunch of other things. You don't look at Tecumseh, for example. They have to bus people from Omaha to go to Tecumseh because they can't staff it. How's that economic development? Go talk to the sheriffs in that county, in the county officials. It's not been a great idea. And Tecumseh's only been online for what, 20 years? We have to be smart. This is not a smart approach that I just don't agree with, setting aside money for a prison when there's so many other things. We're barely coming out of a pandemic. There's a war in Russia. We got gas prices going up. We got inflation. We have all these problems in society, but nobody wants to address those problems. People want to spend $500 million on a prison, and that just doesn't make sense. And we wonder why kids are leaving the state. And I guess the motto is true: Nebraska must not be for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Linehan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I actually grew up close to Tecumseh, and yes, it's not a good situation. It's too far from a workforce, but it's there. And I do think the community does their very best to make, it was a situation born out of crisis when we had the ag crisis in the 80s and people were desperate and they thought it would be helpful. So I want to comment or respond to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh and Senator Matt Hansen. I was listening and I want to agree with them. There is a huge need for more inpatient beds in Nebraska for mental health. Been a huge need. There have been people who have been working on it for, I don't know, I know that they've been working on it for at least 25 years. Very generous individuals who have contributed significant sums of their own money. Lasting Hope in Omaha was built, I'm sure, hopefully they got some government money, but mostly by private individuals. So I'm very hopeful, since we care so much about this, that in the governor's budget, there was $40 million, his ARPA budget, there was $40 million to address mental health inpatient, and I'm hoping we can hold on to that. So we'll get to that next week, I think. So we'll all have a chance to help with the shortage. And I think from what I'm hearing this morning, we're all in agreement that it is a shortage and we need to address it. And the rest of the time, I'm just going to talk because a couple of my colleagues are kind enough to let me spend the night in Lincoln last night, so I didn't have to drive home, so it gave me 2 extra hours of my life. I got up this morning and started reading Amendment. Oh, it's right here. I don't have to read the board. Amendment 1999. So I'm not going to ask anybody because I didn't give them a heads up, but these are some questions I'm hoping the appropriators will hear and then respond to maybe on their time. So on page 48, I'm trying to understand this. I think page 48, line 30, it talks about the cash fund and it's underlined. So I'm assuming that's an increase in the cash fund. So I'm assuming last year when we did the budget, it's under the behavioral health. Last year when we did the budget, we said we were going to spend 13.2 million this year and 26, oh, I'm sorry. Last year, not underlined, we were going to spend, that's crossed out, 11 million and 11 million. And now we're spending 13 million and 26 million in the biennium out of the cash fund. So if somebody can just tell me if that's accurate, I'd appreciate it. And then on the next page, 49, there's from line 13 to 21, there is included in the amount shown as aid for this program for 22-23, 10 million for general funds for behavioral health provider rate increases. And I have the same question as Senator Arch. How do we ensure that rate increases they become salary increases? I don't know how we do that, but I think that's something we should look at. And then it's the cash here. But then at the bottom here, line 18, there's included cash funds. It talks about the opioid. Is there a new cash fund coming from the opioid settlement? Because it mentions it in here, and I just don't. And then I will get up again, but I have a lot of questions on page 50 about how we're directing our people at the state that take care of behavioral health, how they're supposed to be figuring out with all the regions who has money and who needs it the most. I need some clarification on that language because I'm concerned about that puts our people at the state level in kind of a very difficult position, if I'm reading it right. And then also on page 52 at the top, line 1 through 4, it's needy families provide established code may also be used. And then this language, which I don't know, maybe this is always in appropriations bills, I'm asking. It is the intent of the legislature to continue
That's
any.
time, Senator.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you,
I'll
Senator
continue.
Linehan. Senator Linehan. Senator Flood would like to welcome 36 fourth graders from Grant Elementary in Norfolk. They are seated in the north balcony. Please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Returning to debate, Senator John Kavanaugh, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So a lot of good conversation going on and a lot of context being added to certain things. So Senator Lathrop pointed out all the reports that were on the judiciary page, and I'd certainly encourage anyone to go look at them. There's a lot of information to digest, but there's one that I just was looking at, which is the Nebraska Department of Corrections Quarterly Population Summary, and it's about an 8-page report that has a number of different things about what the highest level of offense individuals are incarcerated on, number of individuals, number of people being released, 3-year recidivism rate. But one of the things I was looking at, focusing on, is parole revocation by month. So what that means is individuals get paroled, which several people have talked about, but to kind of, I guess, be helpful. Say somebody gets a sentence of 5 to 10. And they have a parole eligibility date is after they serve what is the equivalent of their 5-year sentence with good time, which is 2.5 years. And their jam date, which a number of people have mentioned, is after their 10-year sentence, which is when you get to a point, which is, if with good time, would be 5 years, assuming you have no mandatory minimums, as we would call it hard time. But so the time in which somebody could be placed on parole is the time between the lower number and the higher number. So a 2.5-year window in there where they can be on parole, which means they can be released from the incarceration in the facility and they are placed in the community, but still subject to supervision, which means if they have some sort of run-in with the law, they can be have their parole revoked and be sent back to incarceration. And so what this the number of people who have been returned to incarceration after being placed on parole. And that happens, and so it breaks it down by month in each quarter. So if you look at this report, I'm looking at what would be page 3 of 8 of what I said was the last report, which is October to December of 2021. In December 2021, there were 19 parole revocations. 8 of those were for technical violations. 11 were for new law violations. So just a little bit more than 50% were for new law violations. The rest were technical. But you look at November, there were 44 revocations, 24 of them were technical, and 20 of those were new law violations. And if you look at October, there were 36 revocations, 23 technical, and 13 new law violations. And what that's telling us is that we are reincarcerating individuals after they've served the time, met the requirements of parole, which Senator DeBoer talked about, that we set out certain programs that they have to achieve, and obviously they have to have good behavior, and they have to go through all the programming. They get paroled, they get into the community, and they start establishing a life, getting a place to live, perhaps getting into further treatment programs, getting a job. They do all those things, and they have a technical violation, which can be failure to call your parole officer, failure to check in, can be failure to get into treatment, or getting kicked out of treatment, washing out of treatment. It can be a number of things that are not a new law violation. A new law violation can be anything from a traffic ticket up to an actual felony offense of some sort that would require subject you to further incarceration. And so this is one of those type of things we're talking about. I know that that CJI had some suggestions about increasing programming, availability, those sorts of things, but we should be focusing on not just, we talk about sentencing reform, of course, I'm in support of that, and this is an important thing, but we need to make sure that we are
1 minute
being helpful, flexible, and actually making sure that people are achieving the objectives we set for them when we do put them into the incarceration system, when we do put them into the rehabilitation system, when they actually start making progress, we don't upset that progress for technical violations. And we make sure that we give them the accurate support. So all of this is a long way to say, I have a bill that makes sure that when somebody leaves custody of the Department of Corrections or the county jail, they get signed up for Medicaid if they're eligible. If they get Medicaid, they can get into a treatment program that'll help them pay for it. That'll help them be in compliance with what we're asking them to do. It is a smart, low-cost way for us to actually achieve the objectives that we're talking about here. This is one of those things that we can be doing in a global perspective to solve some of these problems. If we can cut down on the number of people who are returning to custody by 23 people a month for these.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Sanders and Senator Friesen would like to welcome some special guests, including 4 students from the 1st and 5th grade from Hampton Lutheran, along with 4 teachers from Hampton. And among those are Senator Sanders' nephew, Chaz Bader, who is from Aurora. They are seated in the north balcony. Please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Returning to debate, Senator Blood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, when I closed on my second time, I talked briefly about pay and how important it was for employees to be paid what they're worth. I want to put a plug out. We always have State Patrol on the floor here. I don't know if you guys are aware, but the starting pay for State Patrol is around $25 an hour. I can make that in a meat packing plant right now. So just kind of a heads up, we talk all the time about public safety. Right here in our own chambers, we have people that are not being paid what they're worth. And especially in Western Nebraska, I would think you'd be concerned about that because the State Patrol are few and far between there because they've been asked to cut shifts. So with that said, I would ask that Senator Brewer please yield.
Senator Brewer, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Brewer, we had talked earlier about maybe having a dialogue on the floor. Are you ready for that right now?
Yeah, let me get rid of my meds here. All right,
I'm sorry,
I'm ready now.
So you and I are kind of like-minded when it comes to the prison, that and correct me if I'm wrong, that we believe that the facilities definitely need an improvement. But at the same token, why improve the facilities or build more facilities if we can never rehabilitate those that are incarcerated? Would you say that that's accurate?
Well, yes, but I think we will hit a point we need new facilities.
Wait, I'm sorry, we'll hit a point. I can't hear because people are talking over here.
We will hit a point we need new facilities.
Right.
Okay, I'm with you there.
All right. So you and I have both had firsthand observations. What do you think, what observations do you think that would really help this dialogue today that maybe people aren't hearing on the mic?
Well, I end up there for a lot, well, before COVID, ended there with a lot of activities. Time with the veterans, and of course, there's a veteran wing to the hospital to the prison where they're able to maintain their own facility and paint it and do things there. Kind of it's a morale thing, I guess, for them, and also accountability. And of course, there's a number of tribal activities that are allowed for the native population out there. And then there's a lifers group. And so I'm asked to come out and speak because, well, they're desperate for speakers.
And so one of the observations that I believe you made was even if we wanted to rehabilitate, be it education or be it support groups, what was one of the things that you noticed in reference to the facilities when it came to space?
Well, the areas that they used for programming were so small that there was just no way to ever cycle enough through to actually do the programming they needed.
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying that no matter how good our intentions are, if we want to rehabilitate, we have to have a facility that matches those goals?
A way to actually do the programming. The programming doesn't mean anything if no one ever gets to do it.
Fair enough. So what is the number one thing you hear from the inmates? Do you hear that they don't want to be rehabilitated and they want to jam out? Or do you hear that they want to be rehabilitated, maybe leave with skills that will help them get better jobs when they go? What kind of things do you hear with your one-on-one conversations? Not to lead you into your answers, but.
No, never lead me into an answer there. I think they leave many, and it's supposed, a lot of them are some of the ones that come from the reservation because that's the one I have the closest connection with. Without any skill sets in life, they are very limited on what their future is going to look like. And right now, we're not in a cycle where we're able to give them anything when they leave, except in a very limited capacity.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. The reason I had Senator Brewer yield time and speak with me is because I don't think there's anybody in this body that doesn't think that we need to have rehabilitation. And I don't think there's anybody in this body that doesn't think that we shouldn't be tough on crime. But it's not one or the other. We have to provide appropriate facilities, we have to provide appropriate programming, and we have to quit kicking the can down the road like we do with everything we allow to fester in Nebraska. Senator Lathrop has been waving this flag for well over a decade, 2 decades. The executive branch has ignored it. Much of our budgeting process has been ignored prior to Senator Stinner. And now we have an opportunity to do something about it. We have to decide what is that going to look like. We have a solution.
That's time, Senator.
How do we make that happen? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Blood and Senator Brewer. Senator Pansy Brooks, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm appreciative of the past conversation with Senator Brewer and Senator Blood. Clearly, programming and sentencing reform are what need to be done. Building a prison is easy. We can just go build prisons. Here, have somebody build a prison. Sentencing reform and programming to make people safer when they come out and more able to participate in our community is what's necessary. And we're taking the easy way out here with this prison idea. And now I'd like to give the rest of my time to Senator Stinner, my friend.
Senator Stinner, 4 minutes 20.
Thank you, Senator Pansy Brooks. I just wanted to get on the mic and respond to Senator Linehan's question on page 49 when she was asking a question about the national opioid settlement funds. Yes, we did get $2 million. This gives you the authorization by increasing the appropriations to actually spend the money, but the money has to be spent in accordance with the opioid settlement funds language. So it's restrictive language, and that's why it says for such purposes. The intent language on behavioral health, we had a problem with regions in behavioral health, and many times one region would run out of money. Well, it was the department's program that says we're not going to ever move money around between this. And this basically allows or dictates that if one region runs out of money, that you are to take money out of other regions that are over appropriated at that time and appropriated to those regions. We cited several instances where a region actually ran out of money, or two regions, but we still had a whole bunch of money sitting in other regions that were unused. So that was the intent language to try to fix that. And I think that you were headed toward the child care development block grant. Periodically, and I'm going to say periodically, every 3 years, we do a wage study for child care. And this is in statute already. It was a 60% reimbursement rate based on that survey. We increased that, this language increases that to 75%. That's that 15% increase. So I hope that answers all three questions. I might have missed one. So I will be back on the mic if that's the case. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Stinner, Senator Pansing Brooks. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I've been spending a little time line by line going through the budget again. And I know we're talking about the prison and useful life, and I'm just going to let the rest of you discuss that. And I think in the end, we'll reach some sort of conclusion. But again, if people would look at the budget and go through the line items and look where some of the large increases are in spending, and is this appropriate for what we need to be doing with taxpayer dollars at this time, just because we have a large revenue surplus. In most cases, we're maybe keeping ahead with maintenance. We're doing a pretty good job. And in some cases, you'll see where we have to spend some money on capital improvements. We have to expand some facilities like the State Patrol Crime Lab, things like that. But as you go through that list and we start to look at the different things that we're going to be spending money at, and obviously I'm not near through line item by the budget yet, but as I go through there, what I'm doing is looking for those big increases and seeing if they're appropriate. And I'm going to ask some questions as time goes on some of those different departments or those different agencies that are getting large funding increases. And it does come down to what is it that we're doing for mental health? Are we just increasing provider rates, or are we going to put new beds in? Those are the questions I'm going to be asking, because I think we have an issue with mental health facilities in the state. We don't have enough beds. We don't have beds in the rural areas where we need them. And so, and we've talked about how much that is adding to our prison overcrowding. So that is going to be an issue that I want to talk about later when I find those sections in the budget. But we can increase provider rates, but if we don't increase beds, we're not going to solve some of our problem. And I don't want to stand on the floor and say whether or not we should increase provider rates. I don't know what those salaries are and what kind of issues they're running into there, but I do know that we don't have enough beds. We probably don't have enough staff to take care of those beds either. Those are the things that I think we should be focused on when we have resources, is how do we keep people out of prison? And I know we've talked about treatment, but again, there is this process where we have mental health issues, and that is leading to some of the overcrowding in our prison system. And it's a lot cheaper to work on that issue up front rather than after they're in prison. So those are the types of things I think we as a state, my constituents at least, would be interested in seeing that we spend our money on wisely. And they're not so much probably interested in some of the other things we're going to be doing this year. And when we increase our spending so much year to year, just because we have this huge influx in funds, I have to look at what is long-term, what's sustainable, what's not sustainable.
And again, I've always said, I think we spend too much on government services for the size of our population in this state. And so that means maybe there is agencies that don't need to be there. Maybe just because they've always been there is not a good reason to keep funding some things. And so in order to look at more efficiencies and those types of things, we need to start digging into some of these different line items and just seeing whether that need is still there. And in some cases, we're offering multiple different agencies doing different things on the same issue. And let's see once how much we're spending on workforce housing through the DED and how much the federal government is putting into it through other programs. We've got a lot of organizations out there that have helped with housing and utility bills who receive federal funding and have helped a lot of clients that did not use the emergency housing fund that we had because we made it too difficult to use in rural Nebraska. So those are the types of things I want to have people discuss as we get further into this budget. And I want to know whether we're putting too much dollars into some of these funds and whether or not they could be pulled back and revisited next year, because I don't feel that we have to appropriate every last dollar this year. I think the next year's legislature will be a good body that will also do a good job of appropriating funds. It doesn't have to be this body. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator McCollum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. I started off my comments the other day with a saying that there's only 1,400 people in our prison system in 1980. And even with falling crime rates, we now have 5,500 people incarcerated in our prison system. I heard a radio broadcast one time and said, we need to separate those people that we're scared of, keep them in prison, again, versus those people we are mad at, that are relatively harmless, are nonviolent kinds of people. And that's true. We need to better distinguish between those two groups of people. I also said on the mic that criminal justice reform covers a wide political spectrum, and that's also true. Who are some of the groups that propose criminal justice reform? Right on Crime, and that's a Texas group that we've been talking about. They've closed a number of prisons. Faith and Freedom Coalition, the American Conservative Union, Americans for Prosperity, and that's a Koch organization. Even those people are aiming for criminal justice reform. American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, they want criminal justice reform. Americans for Tax Reform, they understand that taxes are intrinsically connected to our criminal justice system. The more people we have in prison, the more expensive it is. We've heard a wide range of prison costs, anywhere from $35,000 up to $50,000 per inmate. I'm not sure that even includes the overtime that we pay prison employees. So $35,000 to $50,000. The Texas Public Policy Foundation wants criminal justice reform. And really, ACLU is a part of that group too. In December of 2020, I convened, when we were still in the midst of a pandemic, a panel discussion talking about criminal justice reform. Who is involved with that group? It included Senator Linehan, Senator Lathrop, Senator Geist, and we talked about criminal justice reform. And I think there was agreement among that group of people that we need criminal justice reform. And I think now is our opportunity to get it. We need to also talk about the economic costs of keeping people in prison. There's an economic issue, and then there's a human issue. Would Senator McKinney yield to a few questions?
Senator McKinney, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator McKinney, I came before the Judiciary Committee and brought LB 269, and that required the Board of Parole to yearly review all committed offenders who've been incarcerated for more than 30 years. It also required the board to annually publish a list of committed offenders who are 60 years of age or older. I think this is similar to your sentiment. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I introduced LB 980, which would allow for individuals that are terminally ill to have a mechanism to be released, but also it has in that individuals that are serving life after 25 years can be able to go in front of the parole board.
Is that incorporated into LB 920?
Not yet, but I would love for it to be.
Was that one of the recommendations that came out of the study?
It wasn't necessarily a recommendation. It was more of a thought of mine, or not even a thought, just after going through the prisons and actually having discussions and also realizing that we had to do something about the current population is why I introduced it.
And some of those people are way beyond being the kinds of people that would reoffend, don't you think?
I would agree. A lot of the individuals that are serving long-term sentences, once released, never offend, and those inside serving long-term sentences are the mentors and the role models within the institutions right now.
I've met some of those people, and I absolutely agree. And when you talk to them, you know, they recognize their obligation to help those people that are in the prison system and make them understand that they need to go fly right and go straight. So I agree. Thank you, Senator McKinney. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McKinney and Senator McAllister. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you recognize. This is your third opportunity.
Thank you. I would yield the remainder of my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 455.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. I thought this would be a good time to try to talk about how we got here. So we've talked about the fact that our admissions are down, but our population is growing. And that can only mean one thing, that we're filling the prisons up with people that are doing more time. And so who are those people? What does the data show? This is an opinion. What's the data show? And really, I'll tell you, we call it the stacking effect. So if you have a fewer number of people coming in, your admissions are going down, but your population is growing, it's because you're stacking people up. They're doing more time, and that means before they can be released, they're doing more time than, so you have fewer people going out than you have coming in. And CJI looked at this, and so did the World Herald. I want to talk to you about, not that the World Herald uncovered something that CJI hadn't noticed, but they took a different tact. And Henry Cordes had an article a few Sundays back. By the way, it's on our Judiciary Committee website, and I encourage you to read it. In 2009, we passed LB 63. This was when we had a great deal of violent activity in Omaha. We passed a law that required mandatory minimums for certain gun violence. I'll say the Bill 920 doesn't touch that, but it's worth mentioning that that's part of the issue. We have people who are doing things that draw a mandatory minimum. Those mandatory minimums create longer sentences for the same offenses, and so we have some of those people doing mandatory minimums, and they're part of the growth in the population, but they don't explain it all. And it's interesting, colleagues, that when we look at the population going into the Department of Corrections, a lot of them are for class 3s, 3As, and 4s. Those would be, if you're not familiar with this, we have different classes of felonies. A class 4 felony is the lowest class. Above that's a 3 or a 3A. They carry a shorter sentence. We're putting a lot of people in the Department of Corrections on those 3s and 4s. Many of them are doing consecutive sentences. So they might do one dumb thing, get 3 felonies, and have them what they call boxcard. You have to finish one sentence before you can start the next one, before you start the next one. And what you end up with is, with consecutive sentences, is a longer sentence than you'd normally get for a single class 4 felony. And a lot of them are half of them are going in on drug offenses. So we have 2 issues going on. And CJI has focused on what I would call the non-mandatory minimum, non-violent solutions to our overcrowding. These are the situations where people are being convicted for class 4 felonies. Can we divert more of them? Perhaps. But that's how we got to where we're at. It's mandatory minimums, it's consecutive sentences, and then we've also experienced something else. You guys are all familiar with inflation. We're also experiencing some sentence inflation in Nebraska. And what that means is 10 years ago, if you were involved in a burglary, you might get this much time. But as judges 10 years later, they're giving even more than they used to give for the very same offense with the very same penalties available to the court. So that's how we got to the place where we're overcrowded. This afternoon, and it probably won't be till this afternoon, I'd like to start talking about the CJI process, what they found, and what their recommendations are so that we can have a conversation about each of those proposals. And I want to be careful. When we talk about CJI, there's 21 different proposals. I think 17 of them, most of them, are what we call consensus items, where everybody around the table said, yeah, I can buy into that. There are 4 or so that are non-consensus. Some people thought it was a good idea. They are responsive to the overcrowding, but other people just couldn't get there
That's
because
time, Senator. That's time, Senator.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Senator Lathrop and Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Flood, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. President, members. I wanted to have a discussion with Senator Williams, and this is in the underlying AM 1999 as it relates to program Agency 72, the Department of Economic Development, Program 601, Community and Rural Development. Would Senator Williams yield to a question?
Senator Williams, will you yield?
Absolutely.
Senator Williams, you and Senator Stenner and others have developed the Rural Workforce Housing Fund. Can you, this predated my time in the legislature, can you briefly explain what the goal of this program is?
Well, working in economic development across the state, it became very obvious what are the hindrances to growing, and workforce is the primary one. And when you dig into that, workforce housing was the primary issue. So in 2017, we passed LB 518, which created the Rural Workforce Housing Act and the first rural workforce housing grant program at that time. In 2020, we re-upped and allocated some additional general fund dollars to that. Built more houses. The program's been wildly successful. I would tell you that DED would tell you it's one of the most, if not the most, successful program they've ever operated.
So you have another separate bill, I believe it's your priority bill, LB 1069, that would reframe the Rural Workforce Housing Fund and make some minor modifications. Is that right?
That's correct. I actually introduced 3 bills this year, 1069, 1070, and 1071. But 1069 is the one that extends the original program. It actually, if we don't do anything, would sunset at the end of this year. It extends it for 5 years and then has some other, a few other substantive changes.
Okay, so 2 more questions. One is, that needs to pass in order for this language to work. Obviously, you're pleased, I'm pleased with the language on page 37 of AM 1999, the funding allocated to the Rural Workforce Housing Fund, right?
That's absolutely correct. 1069 needs to pass to take advantage of the funding opportunities with 1070 and 1071.
And the other thing I want to emphasize in my support for AM 1999 is that we have to make sure that that Rural Workforce Housing Fund has the ability to do what communities need to do. That's one of the benefits over the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This money would go to an NDO, a qualified NDO, in different parts of rural Nebraska. I'm interested in building housing for folks that are working and happen to be getting an education at the same time. Is that a project that would qualify under this?
I think one of the beauties of 1069 and this whole program is the flexibility that is built in, allowing communities to fit their needs into the bill itself and do that. The definition of workforce housing in the bill is housing that meets the needs of today's working families, housing that is attractive to new residents considering relocation to a rural community, and then it's got some other descriptors. So I believe what you're talking about, as long as it is a need that is, or a type of construction that is meeting that kind of workforce need, I believe it would qualify.
Last question, specifically with co-op students that are finishing their final year of college from Wayne State, living in Grand Island, Norfolk, wherever. would
Senator
that-
Flood, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, final question. Co-op students living in Grand Island, Norfolk, wherever from Wayne State College in their fourth year of college, working full-time, would you think that qualifies?
I would think
1
it
minute.
would. I would think it would. You would have to look at who's going to own those. I don't think this is the design of this is to build a quote dorm, end quote. But if it was housing that would fit under the definition of housing that meets the needs of today's working families, I think absolutely it could qualify.
Thank you, Senator Williams. I really applaud your efforts in rural workforce housing. I think it's absolutely fantastic that the Appropriations Committee agrees, and I look forward to supporting AM 1999. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood and Senator Williams. Senator Matt Hanson, you recognized?
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. I'm actually appreciative to come right after that discussion between Senator Williams and Senator Flood. I had brought a bill that had addressed for ARPA funds a considerable number of different housing funds, including the rural workforce housing funds. And one thing I just want to put in the record right now is yesterday I spoke about an appropriation on the cash transfer bill between rural workforce and middle income. After talking with members of the Appropriations Committee and seeing what the ARPA package is looking like, kind of comfortable with our overall housing investments right now. So I've already indicated to the clerk that I won't be addressing that amendment. Not that I'm necessarily thought we would get there at any time. Just wanted to provide that for the record. I'm glad we're doing some investments on housing and glad we are working on that issue. I do want to kind of continue discussing what I talked about earlier in terms of mental health capacity. And this is kind of an issue that occasionally we get to is people suggest, especially for waiting for regional center for competency restoration, we get to suggestions about this kind of notion of why can't they just treat them in the jails, or why can't we do things in that level? And functionally, because of our statutes, it's an obligation of the state, and it is up until very recently an obligation that had to be accomplished at a state hospital. I believe the correct term was a state hospital for the mentally ill. Functionally, that's just the Lincoln Regional Center nowadays. We have since provided that the DHHS still has to manage it, but can contract with outpatient or other inpatient private facilities in order to address some of that need. Although it's been unfortunate, I think since the hearing we've learned that they've issued some contracts and they've made some referrals, but I think we're in the single digits in terms of the past couple of years, in terms of how well that progress has been made. But I want to go back to the notion of treating in the county jails. And I come from this fundamental position that, especially for folks in this population, which is can be a considerably high need group, that the jails are not appropriate mental health facilities. They aren't designed to be, nor should we start trying to design them to be. Certainly supportive of making jails have more ability and more health treatment when necessary in order to stabilize and intervene. But in terms of kind of long-term intensive care, that is not an obligation that we should be expecting of our jails. It's not an obligation we really expect of any other kind of correction facility. That is functionally a healthcare. Procedure, which is why making sure that there's an appropriately licensed, in my mind, preferably maybe state-run or state-managed, so we can guarantee some minimums, inpatient mental health facility for addressing the capacity in the state. I think that's the way we need, as opposed to any sort of shift that we can just treat them while they're in the county jails. Working on this issue over a number of years, obviously I come from a Lincoln perspective. I've toured the Lancaster County Jail. I've had an opportunity to tour the the Douglas County Jail, which I understand is our largest correctional facility in the state, and see what they have. And the notion that that would be a good place to provide, extensive long-term mental health treatment, I think just doesn't show an understanding of what that facility is. Having been in the medical bay of the Lancaster County Jail and seeing what their space is, and what their space is being primarily taken up, or at least largely taken up, by people with mental health needs in a facility that's largely designed for people who have physical health needs.
1 minute.
Physical ailments, and seeing where they're starting from. You can see just by, I think, walking into that room as a policymaker, looking at, in one of the newer facilities in the state, what they designed and what they built and what they have, and recognizing that that's not a place to provide kind of long-term mental health treatment. That's a place to, at best, stabilize and make sure they have an option to go somewhere else. But that only works if we as a state actually provide for and account for and ensure that there is somewhere else to go. And over the last many years, over my whole tenure, unfortunately, that has not always been the case. While there's been licensed beds available, the wait list can be considerable, measured in months, which puts large burden on all of our counties to often hold people in just holding cells, or just regular cells for people who actually need kind of pretty intensive inpatient health care.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Pauls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After listening to the conversations we've been having this morning on size of jails, training, helping the individuals, it made me think a little bit about when I was back on the city council. Even though I was not directly involved, I was indirectly involved because this dealt with the county. It was under their domain. But they were looking at a new concept, the juvenile detention center, which is, if I can recall, it's the age group between 14 and 19. They were building, or right now they're in the process. It will be finished, I think, in the middle of next summer, or the year 23. They're changing their idea of how to work with these young men and women. You just don't put them in a box and then eventually let them out. They have formed, and like I say, I don't have all the details, but they have formed resource centers that the family is involved with. They think if they could get the younger person, change some of those patterns that dealing with what we're dealing with at the state level, probably should be reduced. Again, smaller or fewer beds and more training of course, the staff, and also educating the young juveniles. Seems like a novel concept, but it seems like maybe the state ought to have that same philosophy of building and not putting a person there forever, giving them skills so when they do go outside and start a new life, they have those skills. It's not going to happen if we don't do something. And believe it or not, I think we all know that it is going to cost some money. But it's also going to be a cost to some of us on our philosophy. We may have to take a look at how we believe in helping people. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pauls. Colleagues, we're going to pause the debate, and if I could have your attention, please. Today is Former Legislators Day. It's an annual tradition in the body in which former senators have come back and visited. We haven't had it over the last couple of years because of COVID, but today we are honored to have the presence of a number of former legislators here with us today. They are not on the floor this morning, but they are in the north balcony, and I'm going to read off each of these names, and when I do, if you would please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska legislature. First is former Speaker Jim Scheer from District 29, Senator Flood's district, who served from 2014 to 2021. Senator Mike Glore from District 25, Senator Aguilar's district, who served from 2009 to 17. Senator Kate Sullivan from District 41, Senator Breezy's district, also served from 09 to 17. Senator Jerry Johnson from District 23, Senator Bosselman's district. Senator Tom Carlson from District 38, Senator Merman's district. Senator John Nelson from District 6, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh's district. Senator Arnie Stuthman from District 22, Senator Mosier's district. Senator Nancy Thompson from District 14, Senator Arch's district. Senator Marianne Price from District 26, Senator Matt Hansen's district. Senator Elaine Stewart from District 24, Senator Coulterman's district. Senator Vicki McDonald from District 41, also from Senator Breezy's district. And last but not least, Senator Carol Hudkins from District 21, my district. Thank you all for all coming down today and for your service to the state of Nebraska. Returning to debate, Senator Coulterman, you recognized.
Good morning again, colleagues. I just wanted to give you a little bit of an insight on how we place these prisons. In 1996, we were in Seward, Nebraska. We had a brand new psychiatric hospital for children. It was called Rivendale. And it was a brand new facility south of Seward. They went broke. And after the dust had settled and after they'd been through bankruptcy, the property came up for sale. And the next thing we knew, we had the state of Nebraska very interested in putting a prison in Seward, Nebraska. Some of the people in the balcony probably remember some of this. At the time, the people of Seward said, we don't want a prison in our district. We don't want a prison here in Seward. So the people of Seward fought it, and we got them to back off. Well, that same, in 1997, LB 150 was passed, and that was Tecumseh's prison. And that they started building that prison in 1997, and they hired the staff for that prison 3 years later in 2000. So it took them 3 years to build that facility. So there's history behind how we get to where we get in the process that you go through. I will tell you that the best run prison that we have in this state is in my district, and that's the York Prison. And we have absolutely no problems there. They do a wonderful job. And I don't think you hear of the York Prison being in trouble very often in the press. Now, on a different note, I want to talk a little bit about some information that I received this morning. And I want to compliment the Nebraska Investment Council. As you know, I'm chair of the Retirement Committee. And I'm proud to announce that at the end of the year investments, under the leadership of the Nebraska Investment Council, we've had wonderful results. The state plan and the county plans, which are cash balance plans, had a rate of return of 16.4%. Our defined benefit plans, which are the state teacher's retirement, the judge's plan, and the state patrol, had a 29.9% return on investment. And even the Omaha plan, the OSERS plan, had a 17.8% return on investment. I think a lot of that is due to the fact that we've got terrific leadership in Michael Walden Newman, and I want to give a shout out to him and his team. The people that are on that committee do a wonderful job, and we owe them a debt of gratitude because they serve as volunteers. But I just thought I'd bring those bits of information up. And with that, if Senator McKinney would like the rest of my time, I'd grant it to him.
Senator McKinney, 1 minute 38.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before we get out of here, I just wanted to remind everybody of what language in the 13th Amendment says. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. What that basically says is slavery is legal in prisons. And also, those who see prisons as an economic development tool pretty much is saying we see legal slavery as an economic development tool, and we should build more plantations in the state of Nebraska. And if that's okay with you, then just say it on the mic.
1 minute.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney and Senator Coulterman. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I haven't engaged in a whole bunch on this conversation. I just want to remind folks as we go through here, you should go through the actual bill and look line by line. I didn't think I was going to come up this quick, so that's good to know. But I want us to really think about, and I'm going to break it down into categories: water trails, prison reform, investments in people, and investments in housing. And I think what concerns me is we have, in the urban area, we have well over 20 senators. And the urban and rural divide in this budget is real. You have to look no farther than the housing piece. But then you start adding the water versus people component, you're looking at roughly $386 million on water and trails, $336.8 million on water and trails. And when you compare that to the urban sector, and that's including Lincoln and Omaha, there is a significant less of investment. And so I just don't know how, let me just put it out there. I don't know how Democrats can vote for this budget. And I believe in the party system because there's two party systems. I believe they're a collection of that the system itself is just a collection or a market basket of ideas. And so you tend to say you're a Democrat because you believe in certain things. You tend to say you're a Republican because you believe in certain things. And in the middle, there is this purple area where you kind of commingle some basic thoughts around economic development, around some basic things. But I don't know how you're going to come to North Omaha and campaign. I don't know how you're going to come to Lincoln and campaign for votes or ask for supports from other fellow Democrats when you're leaving a groups of people behind. I'm just struggling with this overall budget and the cash transfers and how we're okay with voting for the budget. And then I'm gonna flip the script and say, I don't know how conservatives vote for this budget. When you think about what I've always heard for the last 6 years with the conservative ideals and the free markets that the conservatives versus liberals believe in, I don't know how either side can vote for this budget. If you're a progressive and you're a liberal and you believe in humanity and putting people over profits, I don't know how you vote for this budget. If you're a conservative and you look at the spending without real pathway forwards and you believe pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, I don't know how you vote for this budget when we are literally growing government in areas just to make sure we take care of stuff. Not even stuff that we need, just we're going to build a lake. We're going to help Lake McConaughey get more boats. We're going to help Niobrara area beautify themselves so they can somewhat compete with South Dakota. And then some of our biggest potential economic developments, we're not going to really invest those dollars. I know yesterday we joked about internships and things like that, and there was a conversations about it, and I don't mind putting money towards interns. I don't mind putting money towards growing Nebraska, and I think a lake has that space. But when I look at the budget,
1 minute,
that doesn't. This budget does not reflect humans, does not reflect humanity, in my opinion, does not reflect putting people first. And so I would like anybody on appropriations to, I'm not going to get into the prison conversation. I've said it last year when we talked about setting aside of stuff, that simple math 101, based the rate we're growing, by the time we finish the prison, you're going to have to build a new prison. So that's not very conservative. That's not conservative at all. That means you're just going to have to build another prison in 5 more years. That's not conservative. I don't understand that. But we'll get up here and tout conservative values and be tough on crime, but you haven't told me how we stop building prisons. We're going to building 4 or 5 prisons because you can't build your way out of it, and that's just truth. So I hope after lunch, appropriation committees members start talking about all these cash transfers
That's
and
time,
don't.
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator John Kavanaugh, you recognize. This is your 3rd opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I know we're almost to lunch and it's my 3rd opportunity, but I wanted to keep talking about what I was talking about. I know everybody's been talking about lots of different things about this, and Senator Wayne just made a number of good points, but the one that struck me was about it's not very conservative to spend a bunch of money building a prison that then by the time you finish it, if you don't do anything differently, you're going to have to build another new prison. And so he's right in the actual literal sense of conservative, and I think in the political sense as well. The conservative thing to do would be to solve the problem from a supply side, I guess, as people would say. We need to stop sending people into incarceration that don't need to be incarcerated. Obviously, there are some people, if you look at that same report I was reading earlier, which again is the NDCS Quarterly Population Summary, October 2021 to December 2021, lists the number of people who are incarcerated and by offense, by highest level offense. So you have homicides at 574, sex offenses at 1,068, assaults at 1,303, and there's robberies, weapons, arson. But then you go down 770 drug offenses, which is 13.78% of the population. You have 235 theft offenses, 4.2% of the population. Fraud, 42 people. Other, 114. I guess they have so many categories, I don't know what other is. And then they have it by crime, and they have it kind of broken out. You can all look at this yourself, but they have squares, I guess doesn't give you a percentage, but they refer to as property and drugs. They look like they make up about a quarter of the whole population. Obviously, people can disagree about which things require incarceration and which ones don't. There's certainly a lot of individuals. If we have a good faith conversation about actually solving these problems, we can probably find a lot of things that we agree on. And the CJI group came here, met with a lot of stakeholders. They met with me. They met with a lot of people that I know in the both the prosecution, law enforcement, defense bar communities, and talked to them about our criminal justice system. Talked to a lot of judges I know as well, and about issues that we face and ways. And there were a lot of, as Senator Lathrop said, consensus items. There were some items that were consensus among, I would call the stakeholder community, the people outside of the legislature and the executive branch and even the judicial branch here at this kind of higher level, but the folks out on the street, the ground floor of the criminal justice system, of the judiciary system, have more agreement than I think was adopted and recommended by the committee. But there are consensus items, and if we have a good faith conversation about it, people recognize that to achieve our objectives, we should not be incarcerating people just because of that their mental health or drug or alcohol problems have them come in contact with the criminal justice system. People do commit serious offenses that they need to be taken out of society for the protection of society and sometimes for the protection of themselves. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Some things like possession of a controlled substance, or in some cases, third offense shoplifting. I know people don't necessarily know about all of the different levels of offenses, but there's what we call enhanceability, which is you get a you get an offense, a subsequent offense, and then a third offense. In the case of shoplifting or theft, a third offense becomes a felony for which people can go to prison, can spend time in our state penitentiaries for stealing a small amount from a grocery store or a convenience store. And I can tell you it happens. I've seen it happen. And it is a problem, and it is maybe not, well, the theft offenses on here, like I said, 235 people. How many of those people are in there for those lower level theft offenses, for those shoplifting offenses? Not saying that we want to give people a free pass. I'm not saying that we want to encourage people to shoplift, but we need to be reasonable about how we respond to these things. And then we
That's
need
time,
to,
Senator.
thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Must to be printed. Senator Geist to LB 920. Senator Albright, motion to place LB 933 on general file pursuant to Rule 3, Section 20B. That'll be laid over. And a letter from Senator Hughes as chair of the exec board stating that LB 1014 has been designated as a speaker's major proposal for 2022. That's all I have. Excuse me. Sorry, Mr. President. Senator Hunt would move to recess until 1:30 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Colleagues, we'll keep the queue for the afternoon debate. You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. We are in recess.